is now time for our next segment, our big block segment tonight. Reacher! Oh, that does not look correct. Let me say. So, Reacher. Today we are discussing. It still just wants to do that. Fine, I can fix that. Boom. We are going to do a comprehensive look at the book and how it relates to the TV show. John, I will give my initial thoughts. First of all, I am impressed with the book itself is absolutely worth the read. And though we tend to spoil stuff about shows that are currently ongoing, like with Severance, with this, we're not going to be too spoiler heavy because it is absolutely worth reading. And we definitely recommend that you check out the show as well. So we will be touching on some soft spoilers, but probably not really big resolution heavy because there's a conspiracy involved. And if you know anything about me, I kind of dabble in that stuff, and that's a lot of influence for my own writing, so we don't want to ruin it. So my first initial thoughts are, again, the accuracy is impeccable. If Amazon wants to be this accurate with my work, we can definitely work out a deal, because that's exactly the kind of book to screen translation that I like. I mean, even Jackson did an impeccable job with taking Lord of the Rings to the big screen. And even though the final battle in Return of the King doesn't hold up to the book, I actually kind of like that, because that's what makes the book all the more worth reading, is that you get a different experience for the ending. And that's what I realized when I started reading this book and watching this show, is that it's not so much that the book is not accurate, it's more so, or not that the show is not as accurate to the book, you also got to look at telling a story through a different medium is a form of retelling. And with shows, you do have to make certain adjustments. And I think a lot of the adjustments of what I've seen so far, because admittedly, I've only gotten halfway through episode 4, just new job, new time crunch, new time management. I gotta figure out how to work that in with this. So I wasn't able to get through the entire show, but I did get through the entire book, so nothing will be ruined for me. But I do like the accuracy of most events. What are your thoughts, John?
Well, I may or may not have prepared for a comparison between the 2012 Jack Reacher and this new one, not the book. Just kidding. I read the book. I love Lee Child. He's one of my all-time favorite writers. One of my all-time favorite, just literary minds. I find Jack Reacher to be the American Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
If the most Texan American wrote Sherlock Holmes. I'm going to do my best not to spoil anything in terms of this one.
Just don't go with big spoilers. Soft spoilers are acceptable because, I mean, people are going to... I'm hoping that most of the viewers, listeners have at least read the book or have at least watched the show. But just, you know what big twists I'm talking about to avoid.
Right. So that's why I say Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Every book by Lee Child is a new Sherlock Holmes story. It's a new Jack Reacher adventure. It has very little to do with the last one, but it's always building on the last one. So all the characters you meet in book 1, this is a spoiler-ish, but more in terms of what you're getting yourself into. If the character doesn't die in this book, they're probably going to show up in every other book. If they don't die in this show, I hope that they show up in every other season or iteration of this show. Because I've been waiting for this since I read 61 Hours. That was my first actual introduction to Jack Reacher, even though my first introduction was the 2012 Jack Reacher movie. I just love movies. I watch them all. I regret it a lot.
If you want to do a comparison,
especially with that one.
I didn't watch the 2012 movie, but if you would like to touch on that, please go right ahead.
So I'm just gonna do the most blatant, obvious comparison. It's Tom Cruise.
Yeah, 5 foot whatever doesn't exactly compare to our big stacked gentleman here. Continue. I'm gonna get a different picture.
No, you're good. There's a line in one shot of the book, and it's actually portrayed in the film, the 2012 film, where the hotel attendant or motel attendant, because Jack Reacher's usually staying in motels, not hotels. The motel attendant says, when you see him, you'll know who is capable of doing it. And then Tom Cruise pulls up. Because the villain in the movie One Shot, and in the book One Shot, I should say, in the book One Shot, in the movie Jack Reacher 2012, in the movie, sorry, let me get my thought together real quick. In the movie, the villain is played by a guy that's about 6'something, like 6'2", and is about 190 pounds, maybe 210 tops. I don't know. But it obviously he's bigger than Jack Reacher. In the book, he's also supposed to be bigger than Jack Reacher. And I want to say he's described as 6'8", but it might have been closer to 7 feet tall. Basically, Andre the Giant in gangster form. And that is, like, in the movie, the 2012 movie, which I don't care about spoiling, the person that is dead is one of the first people Jack Reacher talks to, who gets him, like, looped into the major events of the movies, and she's strangled to death, but with one hand mark across her throat. And the thumb alone is almost the size of her whole throat. So when the motel attendant says, when you see him, you'll know who did it, because the body's found at Jack Reacher's motel in the dumpster. She says, you'll know who did it because Jack Reacher's 6'6", 250. But when Tom Cruise pulls up, just laughable.
Yeah, he's on stilts or something, clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember watching that trailer back in the day, and I was just like, that looks dumb. I'm not watching that. And mostly because it was Tom Cruise, pretending to... Tom Cruise as an action star works great for Mission Impossible, because...
Even James Bond, short people, nobody remembers short people.
But, see, there's a place where that can work. With a character like Jack Reacher, that was the stupidest decision that I think anybody could have even made. I don't care. Your script could have been Oscar bait, the greatest story ever written. And if you miscast somebody when you're doing a script from a book, like they did with Reacher, like putting Tom Cruise instead of Alan Ritchson, look at this guy. This is an imposing bulk of man meat, okay? This is somebody I see walking down the street, and if he's even glaring at me, I'm probably reaching for my sidearm just to be safe. Like, this is not somebody that I want to cross. And so, yeah.
I love that you say that.
I was not interested in Reacher, and I didn't even know about the books at the time, so...
I love that you say that, because as you progress through the series, and as any of our audience progresses through the series, the more you're going to see how much Alan Rickman truly fits the role. Ritchson. Alan Ritchson 100% fits the role. And even if you know his film history, which I do, Blue Mountain State, For the Wind, Rise of Thadland, amazing. And Alan Ritchson was phenomenal in that one. And he was even phenomenal in his Disney role as Hawkman or something like that. Great. Just great actor. But when it comes to Reacher, this is the only role he was born for.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
Throughout the entire series, most of the introductory prologues of the books start out describing exactly what you just described. If I see a guy looking like that walking up to me, I'm reaching for my sidearm.
Well, it depends on how they're looking. If he's smiling at me, or
No.
there's at least a cordial nod, all right, no big deal. But they're like staring me down. I'm like, okay, I think this guy wants to eat me or something.
Even if
You
he's
know,
staring
and I'm
in your
6'2",
direction,
and I'm intimidated by this guy.
right,
And I
right,
haven't even seen. I'm just watching him on screen, and I haven't even been in his presence. But
and that's the description, because every time Reacher meets somebody, depending on how he meets them, like in the first scene of this show, when he's getting arrested, the cops are like, "We're going to arrest the Hulk. Bring everything," right?
Yeah.
If it was Tom Cruise sitting in that booth, just bring the 6'6" cop. He'll put him in his place.
Just bring it. Yeah.
He'll shake his lunch money out of his pocket.
Bring a 22, and that'll do the same. That'll have the same effect as a shotgun for someone like Tom Cruise.
Exactly, but when it came to Alan Richardson, it was exactly what Lee Child wrote. There's a monster in this booth who is a literal just monster, and he's a military guy, so he's not necessarily going to be walking around with a smile on his face. He was trained to never get caught smiling in pictures. Right? So that's just his natural state of face, is the 1,000-yard stare. But when it's a 6'5" Alan Richardson, I might pee a little. And that's what this show really got. Like, that was the justice that I needed most from the original adaptations of the books. But to then see how closely this book aligned, I came up with something while you were giving your introduction. The book is more of a guide to understanding each character verbally than it is to a compare and contrast. Like,
yeah,
the book takes a lot more time to describe Jack Reacher's thoughts, his intellect, his intelligence, his history, and it describes it in such a way that you're not too busy just looking at Alan Richardson, Thad. Like, let's be honest, it took me a second to realize that, like, he truly is the perfect fit, just because I remembered Rise of Thadland. But I also remembered Mission Impossible, and that wasn't enough to get me over the fact that Tom Cruise is 5'3". And so, in this instance, the book is more of like a synopsis of the show, even though it was written first. And that is a crazy amount of skill on this show writers to be able to blend the two.
Well, that's what happens when you stick as close to the source material as you possibly can without having it get too overbloated with exposition. And that's really what I gotta. So I gotta hand it to the guy who I forgot his name. I gotta hand it to the guy who basically transcribed it into a. I believe it was actually Nick Santora who did all of the legwork with that. Because
he's claimed as the creator. I don't know if he wrote every episode. I believe
he is credited as the writer because he did adapt it for television, and he did a very good job. But he also missed the mark on a couple of small things. So here's the negative portion of our overview, right, that I have so far. There's a scene that I liked that I thought should have been in the show. Now, it doesn't ruin the show because I want to say he does a very good job of having not just, one-liners from the book, but actual full-on detailed scenes are pretty much put on screen. It's almost like the book just comes to life in moments. Then there's moments where you kind of glossed over some things. Now, the one for me that kind of gets a little bit of a negative hit, and this is more of a nitpick, okay? I want to clarify. This is not me saying that the show is bad or that it was done badly. I have praise for this show. I'm just expressing my mild disappointment as a viewer, as a reader, as a listener.
As audience.
Yeah, as a member of the audience, I was a little disappointed that the prison sequence was kind of sped up, so to speak. Particularly because they basically, him and the other character, they get taken off the prison and they're in their regular regular clothes because they're just in holding. They're not actually being processed into jail. So the deviation from the book is that instead, as you can see here, he has to dress in jail clothes, which I don't know why that had to be changed. I'm open to explanation. My main issue is that there's a scene where the janitor is coming through and he notices them sleeping in the cell or laying in the cell, and he goes, wow, I've worked here for 20 some odd years and I've never seen anyone, in here wearing what you're wearing. And they're like, well, of course not. We're not actually in jail. We're just in holding. And the janitor starts laughing and he's like, so what's so funny? He goes, hey, you're not in holding. You're on the floor with all the bad guys. And it's like the tension in the book starts to set in when you realize that, oh, they were put in the wrong spot. And instead, the way they do it in the book, Reacher goes outside the cell and goes, oh, we're in with the bad guy. We're in with like the murderers and the rapists. And oh yeah, it feels like it just kind of glosses over that whole point, and it sort of cheapens the suspense of the moment of, oh no, you've been misplaced, which may or may not be on purpose. And then of course there's the scene with the confrontation of the prisoners coming in, and they want to have their way with the guy that Reacher's with, and they have basically, the writer, this is where we transition to the praise portion. The writer took that scene from the book and just basically put it on screen because there was no reason to change anything. And that's what that's what I love about this show so far is, yes, certain events, they're kind of interchanged, placed in different areas, but they still happen. It's the respect that Nick has for Lee Child's work, that while he did bring it, instead of making it take place in the era that it takes place in, he brought it to the modern day and made those adjustments accordingly. And I think you actually had an explanation for that you wanted to get into about translating it from when it was written in the early 90s versus today.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we have to acknowledge is two things. One, this is supposed to be adapted to 2022, right? And there have been a number of changes to the legal system, to the prison system, and to the overall, like even later stories and some stories in this one kind of had to skip some events because of things like TSA changes. For example, the scene where they go to meet the secretary had to be completely edited because with modern TSA, it would have been next to impossible for the events to occur.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, it's not just respecting the writer, but it's respecting the modern world so that the viewer can pretend like this happened yesterday. And that is even bigger because, like, when you're reading Lee Child's book, you understand that you're reading a book from 91. You understand that 9/11 hasn't happened, and you understand all of that. So you're just like, okay, whatever. But when you're watching a show that's made in 2022, and if it just pretends like 9/11 hasn't happened yet, it hurts. It breaks you. And that's why, again, like I bring up Thad, like I'm going to bring up Thad, is in terms of Alan Ritchson's history of characters, it feels like he went from the football captain to the wannabe superhero to Jack Reacher, which in Jack Reacher's story, it goes from defending his brother while moving around as an army brat to defending his people in the army to defending the people that he meets on the road, which it really feels like Alan Ritchson became Batman while still being all of the other stories he was before. Like him being a Hawkeye was his Robin period where he thought he knew what it meant to be a hero, or not Hawkeye, but Hawkman. But he thought he knew what it meant to be a hero, but he was always being overzealous about it because he thought that as long as you punch violence down to nothing, there might not be more violence, which is completely erroneous. That's fighting fire with fire, and it's all scorched earth. Yeah. Right.
And all right, real quick, I just want to say, because I'm going to put something up on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and put the trailer on loop in the background for the viewers. Now, I do want to say, It is an Amazon Prime trailer, so they don't really follow a lot of the rules of most other trailers when they put their content up. So there is a couple of sequences that may be a little bit grotesque, so to speak. It's not super bad. However, we are putting this up there for the viewers watching this in the event that if you haven't seen the show and maybe you might not want to see something that bad, you can get an idea of, okay, is this a level of violence that I can handle? Because, again, one of the things they do, bring the book to screen accurate, is some of the very, very, I don't want to keep saying grotesque, but they're very
Gruesome,
thank you, sequences of the show or of the story that are, but now they don't really show a lot of that as bad on the screen, but you're going to get an idea of what to expect. So I want to just make sure, because after all, our stream is PG-13, so we do try not to swear a whole lot or feature a lot of just really nasty stuff.
our
But that's
intention
the whole
is to
point of a
give you a
trailer, is
taste
to get
of
an idea. So if this is something you're not comfortable with, now you're going to find out for sure. So yeah, just wanted to preface that before I put it on screen. It's not going to be like super terrible, but
there's violence. Violence warning.
Violence. Exactly.
And it's that. See, that's something that I actually want to just jump off of. It's a solid jumping off point. The violence in this show and in the books is meant to do two things. It's meant to, excite the reader. It really is meant to make it feel like this is an action novel, which with modern movies and everything like that makes you think that you have to basically be writing John Wick to be able to establish a character like Reacher, because a lot of the fight scenes in the books are basically what John Wick was trying to portray. Not necessarily in the overall kill count or the overall justification for going to commit violence, because this show really talks about Jack Reacher's motivations for violence. He's not inherently violent, but he's inherently bigger than everybody else, and that allows him to get his point across without instantly being violent. So the cool and collected head that he has throughout the entire series that Lee Child has written, and now his son Andrew Child has jumped on and started writing with him, is that Jack Reacher is supposed to be a man's man in the most bland of terms. And I say that because most kids grow up thinking that a man's man is the toughest kid on the block and also stands up for good. And that's about as man's man as it gets. And then everybody has their other variations, don't cry, don't do this, whatever. And those are all personal and individual, and you can have your own. But what Jack Reacher shows us and what this series shows us is that a man's man is those two things. They are always honest. They always tell their definition of what is good. But at the end of the day, they do their best not to do harm. And in every instance in this show, even in the violence that we see in the trailer, Jack Reacher 100% tells everybody that's about to commit violence, don't, or you will regret it. And that's fair is fair. Like, especially when it comes to a prison fight, right? If you're in prison and you say, don't do this or I will hurt you, and they do it anyways, oops. And that's really what he does.
I really liked. So you mentioned a good point about how the book is able to share Reacher's thoughts because it's told from his perspective. What I really like about the show is that particular sequence is the fact that the writer managed to transcribe that scene almost perfectly. When the prisoner guys come into the cell, I knew it was coming, and I'm sitting there watching because in the book it goes, and he says, I'm going to count to 3, and you guys are going to, probably you're going to want to walk out of here. And he goes, and of course, after 2, I decided to strike because I wasn't going to give him a fair shot. And he executes that so perfectly on screen when he goes, 1, 2. And that's the moment, like right after he said do, I kind of braced myself. I'm like, oh, is he going to do it? Yeah, boom, and he does it. And I'm like, yes, excellent. Well done. And of course, he kicks all their asses, and it's awesome. The thing you bring up, however, about the character is he's not just a man's man because he's 6'4" and he's, a big, bulky man. He's also intelligent. He's extremely smart. This is an excellent example of good characters, just all around. They're all great. Is the best way I can put it. Exactly. That's what makes them so believable. Is the fact that they're real people, but they're also like people that you kind of want to sort of.
In every instance of my life, I want to emulate Jack Reacher, because
right.
I, as long as I've read the books, he truly has become my metric of good. And this is me trying not to give spoilers, but it might give spoilers to how Jack Reacher decides to handle certain situations depending on the book. But number one, Jack Reacher knows for a fact that if you punch up, you have to punch hard and precise. Never pretend like you're just big enough for every situation. And number two, more than anything, you have to be as detailed and as intelligent as Sherlock Holmes in order to be able to solo anything. And Jack Reacher is so much that person who, like in this scene, like you said, the 1-2 punch. In the book, there's a lot of time where he describes each punch and swing and lock. And it's been a little while since I read it, so I can't remember for sure, but it felt like the show basically was scene for scene according to the writing. But in terms of what Jack Reacher was thinking and what was written in the book about what he was thinking, it's always him sizing up everything. In the book, it's like as if you were walking up next to Jack Reacher and he says, all right, you see that guy, and that guy, I'm going to do this, this, and this to them, and you're going to watch me do it. And it's not like he's bragging. It's literally like he is a predictive computer who just knows exactly how his opponents are going to act based off of all of the details that Lee Child takes the time to explain. He goes, because his shoes and outfit are this, he's most likely that. It's not necessarily that it's a guarantee. And in a lot of the books, there are times where Jack Reacher finds out that he completely miscalculated his target. But in the books, it shows how he failed to calculate and how he took the time to reassess in the moment and get smarter. And that's something that this show takes a lot of time to do non-verbally.
Yeah.
Because you watch as Reacher constantly reads every corner, every door, every room, where he sits, what he's doing, when is he pleasant, who is he pleasant to. And in the book, it explains why he does all of that. But in the show, he just does that. That's wild.
Well, and the other thing is I like that he's not invincible. He's not invulnerable. He takes damage and he has to recover like anyone would, even though he is a big, imposing bulk of a human. He's not perfect. He does make mistakes, but he's also, what I really like about the character and for myself, is he's a no bullshit guy. He will straight up tell you if he doesn't like you. He will straight up tell you what he intends to do. Just like when Finley's like, hey, try not to get caught up in lockup and try not to end up in prison. He's like, no, I'm going to go do what I need to get this investigation continuing. And you're just going to deal with it. And if I end up in prison again, I end up in prison again. Like, he's literally, he just doesn't, he's obviously got no ulterior motives here. He's just here to try and do the right thing in the long run. And that...
Just one thing we should add real quick to anybody who's just listening and has never read the books or never watched any of the films. He is when I say that he is the American Sherlock Holmes, it's because his education, the primary source of his education, was in the 110th military police unit, which was, I don't know for sure because I'm not in the Army, I was in the Marines, so I don't know all their units, but according to the books and according to the story, the 110 MPs are supposed to be the most investigatory and invasive investigatory unit in the Army, to the point that, like, and it's explained throughout the series, the amount of investigations he had to occur or had to do while in the Army. So when it comes to him, like you said, when he talks to Finley, he says, no, I'm going to do what needs to get done. It's because he also knows that Finley may or may not be 1/10 the cop he is. Because when I say he's a cop, he was the cop of the Army, which is 10 times scarier than being the cop of Boise, right? Because the cop of the Army has to go for the most vicious Army men. The cop of Boise has to go for the most vicious person in Boise.
You might have a
and I don't think we have any serial
in the
killers.
North End because, you know, somebody ate somebody's soy latte or whatever.
Exactly. And that's why I say that, like, he looks down. It's not that he looks down on cops. It's that he knows his position in relation to cops. And then he also knows how people respect him. And that's why, like, in the show, it shows that only Finley is the one that got anything out of him. He never said a word to anybody that talked to him. And then Finley walked in the room and he said, oh, yeah, let me talk to you. Because he saw Finley as a respectful person. But it's because he has the education. So if you're thinking that Reacher's just some fucking 6'6" guy that showed up on the party and is killing people like Batman, he's not. He's 100% trained, 100% bought by the military, created by the military, and now is trying to live a peaceable life, and the world won't let him. And that's why he is the way that he is. It's not so much that he just accidentally became this. And I'm trying not to give any spoilers, because the books all take a ton of time to detail A, where he came from, B, where he's going, and C, who he is as a man. And that is something I don't want to take away from any potential readers and viewers.
Yeah, no, so it's the same reason that when I did my my critical drinker parody review, but I also did a legit review of his book Redemption. I actually kind of left a lot of it out because I respect the product, and that's what we want to try and do here. So obviously, you know, yes, we give spoilers for Severance because Severance is ongoing. You have time to catch up and at least enjoy the new episodes as they air. And of course, once the last episode airs, we'll be talking about it and spoiling it. But with this show, because it dropped right all at once and the book is already out there, we do want to make it a point that we don't want to ruin it too much, because we want you to go out and experience these stories. It's not that we're trying to, like, yes, we are shilling for these products because we like them. And that's why our whole point of our show is to show stuff we like and give commentary on it. We hope you like it too.
I don't think we're shilling. I think we're the
entirely.
most basic form of advertising. We are word of mouth. This is our mouth. If you are here to listen to us, this is what we like. And if you like what we like, you're going to have a great time.
Right. And if we find something like, you know, the Star Wars Star Cruiser, which would be a big waste of money, we're going to tell you straight up, this will be a stupid waste of money, and we don't want to waste anyone's time or anyone's money. And so that's why we're not giving away too much with this show, and why we're not going super in depth with the comparison, at least not because we're just trying to get views, but also because we believe that this is worth enjoying
every second. Whether you listen to the audiobook, whether you watch the show, whether you do both, or you even go and buy the actual hard copy, you're going to have the best 10 to 16 hours of your entertainment time. You're not going to regret a single second of it. Not 1 second of your time reading or watching this show is wasted. And that's really what we're trying to
Yeah.
offer to the audience.
And there's even other shows here in this Amazon preview too that are popping up that honestly, I mean, between The Boys and The Expanse is another good example of a book to TV production that stays true to the story that all the book fans have raved on. They've actually said it's very
I never
tame by
knew it was a
comparison,
book.
which okay, no problem with that. I don't have a problem. See, and that's the other thing is I still think it's a respectful retelling. If you take a story and you decide, well, maybe let's not be that. Let's maybe not have that ridiculous scene play out. Let's maybe have it implied, and that's fine too because it's not taking away. Like I said, my only complaint so far is the fact that they cut out the scene with the janitor. I felt the suspense, the slow burning suspense of that scene was better, but I understand the why.
I meant to rebut you on that one, and it
Please
goes
do.
back to the TSA comment, but it's also in this story you're watching it from Jack Reacher's perspective. So you're in the book you're watching it from Jack Reacher's perspective, I should say. So he tells you that he's going to maximum security prison, and he knew he was going to maximum security prison, and he knew that was wrong before the janitor said anything. But in the show, all you see is him going from jail to maximum security prison. So they thought that I would assume that the director and the writers assumed that was enough to tell you there's a big problem with that. And if you don't know that, then you're not Jack Reacher. And that makes you want to watch more because Jack Reacher knew that, and if you read the book, you know that Jack Reacher knew that, and if you love Jack Reacher as Jack Reacher, you're like, oh, well, I knew that. The moment I saw him going to maximum security prison, I was like, that's not what you do if you're staying in a holding cell, because I've read the Jack Reacher novels, and I know what Jack Reacher's told me about what is right and wrong with the system. And that's the only rebuttal I really have and like explanation is like maybe they just thought the showing of him going to where he didn't belong, for those that know how prison works, for those that know how jail works, they would get it and everybody else wouldn't, and that would help you not know that there's a grand conspiracy. I feel like the scene you describe is too much of a giveaway, similar to the fact that he doesn't get his change in quarters, which in the book is something that is continuously talked about throughout the entire story. And that's my only justification.
Well, in the book, they specifically go in because they're only being held. They're not formally arrested. They're left in their civilian clothes, and they're not forced to change. They don't get processed because they're not supposed to be. And that's where the suspense comes, because they're in their cell and the janitor's like, no, you're on the lifer floor. You're not on the holding floor. And he realizes, oh, okay. So that was my main issue, was I felt the suspense was better in the book in that. But that is not a disparage against the show. The show's version is fine. It's not bad.
Well,
I like the book better in that instance.
To me, in that instance, like especially with that instance, and where I don't remember if it's alluded to later episodes or in the episode or after or two, the episodes you've seen, but later on it explains more about that prison scene from Reacher's perspective. He does a little expose on what happened there and why it was such a obscure event, and he tells all of the details of like, yeah, I wasn't supposed to be there. I also wasn't supposed to be the one getting hit. I was never supposed to be there, but I was there because of extenuating circumstances, which in real life would appear as coincidence, but in this show, or in the story of Jack Reacher, there are no coincidences, and that's what Jack Reacher is like. It's like what he does is he explains the lack of coincidence. He knows how to tie those really, really thin threads together. And so that's why I say, like, I'm really doing my best not to spoil anything. I know there is a scene where he discusses what happened in the jail in the show. And in that scene, it takes care of a lot of the things that were removed from his experience in the jail. But also I wonder, just as like a thought in terms of like I said, with bridging the gap between the 90s and the 20s, what if the writers actually went to a prison and just double checked, hey, would you ever accept and then put civilian clothes on the Gen Pop line? And the guards just definitely told them no, and they were like, look, we can't do this again. Like, we can't do this like it used. Like, what if the guards literally said in the 90s, oh yeah, that's totally a potential reality, woulda, coulda, shoulda. But in modern times, there's just too many cameras, too many rules, too many things that would have gotten us in trouble. It would have been better to just put them in the prison uniforms.
So protocol changes from back then to
right.
today.
So
that played into that. Yeah, no, that's a very valid point, and I
should
say
I'm
agree
assuming.
with that. Like I said, it's just my disappointment is not like, oh, this show's literally unwatchable, don't watch it. Nothing to that extreme. It's literally just, it really just boils down to a nitpick. I felt the suspense was better generated from the books version, but you make a valid point. This show does not take place in the 90s. It takes place in the modern day. And so, of course, policies change, and they have to, and that's the other thing. They did kind of gloss over the, oops, put you in the wrong cell part. And it's like, okay, but then you bring up the point of cameras and logs and everything. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Maybe this was probably one of those sequences that there was no right way to do it. Because there's so much that's changed between the early 90s and to today that it would have just been almost impossible to really execute that scene properly. But what they did execute, I think, was good. So maybe the glossing over was necessary to keep you distracted from asking too many questions about the implications of that sequence. So, yeah, I can buy that.
I do want to throw one more thing out there that you just made me think of it, and that's the writer of Reservoir Dogs. When he was approached by the FBI because he had literally written a movie that was the most unthought of bank heist in history, according to the FBI. So I don't want to say that Lee Child has done similar writing, but I do believe that he has gotten close. And so theoretically, some of his writing could have influenced some of the prison systems, some of the TSA, some of any variation of the things that Reacher interacts with. And that his interaction, his writing, and infection of those systems then came back to plague the show. Just another part to add to, like, yeah, it's an adaptation of the 90s to the 2020s, and the adaptation, like you said, I feel like we're being nitpicky in terms of one teacher thinks that the student should have been more explicit, and the other teacher sees why they weren't explicit, but it's both because of differing understanding. Like, mostly I think it's just due to the fact that I've read more of Reacher, and so I've seen Lee Child overcome the change in government. I've seen, like, I know for a fact that he is actively researching everything he's pretending Reacher is doing, and not like lightly. He goes into the point about explaining the difference between a 38 special and a 38 ACP, and a 9mm ACP and a 38 snub nose. And he explains how that if you get shot by a snub nose, you actually have a relatively high chance of completely not being bothered by it, depending on your body mass index. And that is something that only a super nerd / quality writer would do. And that's what my hopes is that these writers, every person that worked on this, just in the first episode, I noticed that one of the two writers were Nick Santora and Kate Duffy. To both of them, I think you wrote the first episode exactly how me, a Lee Child diehard, wanted to see that episode. So do not take anything I say as negative, just constructive.
And I'm not a diehard, and I'm just pointing out the differences because I mean that's the point of doing a book show comparison, is to point out the deviations. And I mean, a lot of the smaller deviations do not impact the overall story, and that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the broadcast. Is that's what I find is really important with these types of shows, is that we have to recognize that these are all a retelling of an already established story. This is why the Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't follow the original comic books, because the Marvel Cinematic Universe is its own version of those stories. And so that's what we have to recognize here, especially with a show that was written in the 90s, took place in the 90s, a book that took place in the 90s. They decided to make it in the modern era. Okay, so that does change a lot of the implications of today's, because you're right, there's been a lot of significant events that have happened in human history since this book was written that need to be acknowledged. And I think this, overall, I give absolute praise to this. My personal nitpick on this show is not a reflection of the writer's ability to transcribe this into a screen production. They did an excellent job, and I would be grateful if somebody did the same for my works and did my book like this. I'd be like, yeah, I'd have to read it first before I approve it. But if this is the level of respect that someone wants to give to me and my work, yeah, it'll happen. You'll see Galaxia on screen, absolutely. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and just kind of wrap this segment up with absolutely worth the time to watch if you've got it. And if you've got Prime and you've read the book, definitely read the book first. Or you can do it after, honestly, because that might even give you a different perspective. And that's ultimately what our show is about, is sharing those perspectives, where John has a perspective of having read more Reacher than I have, and I've only just recently gotten into this. That's part of what makes our discussion special, is we're able to swap those ideas and those insights. And so if you want to watch the show first and then read the book, hey, just make sure you do both, because they're both great versions of the same story, and they're both worth your time all around.
I want to add one quick note to this. Nick Santora, I think no matter what any marketing exec tells you, just do what you just did. I don't know how you got to where you got, but do not fucking listen to the advertisers.
Hey, that's two.
I know that's two.
Yeah, need you to know that,
Nick. I need you to know that, Nick Santora. Do not listen to the advertisers. Do not listen to the marketing teams. Do not listen to the people that assume they know your target market. As a diehard Lee Child fan, you made a movie version of Lee Child, of his vision, of his character. You nailed the casting. You nailed all of the directors you picked for each episode. You perfected this. You are now the standard for book to TV adaptation. Anything less than you starting now is lower than you. Because Parker mentioned it. Lord of the Rings and Jackson, like, you blew Jackson out of the water because you took one of a series of novels and turned it into 10-hour length segments of pure enjoyment. I watched every episode as fast as I could, and I mean that because I did have to take an 8-hour sleep period. But the moment I woke up the next morning, the first show I turned on was the next episode that I was supposed to be on for this show, because this was 100% binge worthy. This show is one of the number one reasons why I was so willing to start this podcast, because it was the first time in a long time that any modern retelling has been so respectful of the source material.